In the shadowy, claustrophobic world of a Russian flophouse, a ragged group of souls debates a fundamental question. Is it better to cling to a comforting lie or to face a brutal, degrading truth? This is the central drama of Maxim Gorky's seminal play, The Lower Depths. Our inquiry begins here, not merely as a literary analysis, but as a philosophical excavation. We will use this stark stage as a lens to examine the precarious nature of human dignity, that intrinsic worth of a person when it is stripped of all social veneer and material security. Furthermore, we will interrogate how Gorky's portrayal of this tension between truth and comfort became a foundational template for socialist realism, the dominant artistic doctrine of the Soviet era. This research seeks to understand how a work of art can serve as both a mirror to society's darkest realities and a potential blueprint for its ideological transformation. To navigate this terrain, we must first define our coordinates with precision. Human dignity, philosophically speaking, refers to the inherent, inviolable worth of every human being, irrespective of their social status, achievements, or circumstances. In Gorky's context, it is the residual spark of self-respect and moral agency that persists even in the most abject poverty and social marginalization. The dichotomy between truth and comfort explores the human propensity to choose between a harsh reality that may be psychologically unbearable and a sustaining illusion that offers solace. In The Lower Depths, this is dramatized through characters who either embrace their grim fate or construct elaborate, hopeful fantasies to survive it. Social realism is a broader literary and artistic movement that seeks to depict the everyday lives of ordinary, often impoverished people with unflinching accuracy, focusing on their social conditions and economic struggles. It is driven by a desire for truthful representation. Socialist realism, as defined by the cultural authorities of the Stalin era, is the specific, state-sanctioned artistic framework that mandates art not only depict reality but also serve a didactic, political function, to educate, inspire, and advance the cause of socialism. Gorky, hailed as the father of Soviet literature, is intrinsically associated with its development. His work exemplifies the transition from critical social observation to art with an explicit revolutionary purpose. The world that forged Gorky and his characters was one of profound upheaval. In the early 20th century, pre-revolutionary Russia was a society straining under immense pressure. A rigid class structure created a vast chasm between a small, privileged elite and a massive population of peasants and burgeoning urban workers living in dire poverty. Industrialization brought exploitation, squalor, and dislocation. This was the lower depths, in a literal sense the basement of society where the discarded and desperate congregated. Simultaneously, the air was thick with ideological ferment. Ideas of socialism, Marxism, and radical change circulated among intellectuals and the disenfranchised, promising a violent upheaval of the old order. Gorky's The Lower Depths, written in 1902, captures this moment perfectly. It is not a play about the revolution itself, but about the human raw material upon which revolutionary ideologies would be built. The flophouse becomes a microcosm of Russia itself, a place of degradation, hopelessness, simmering anger, and desperate searches for meaning, whether in bitter truth or fragile comfort. The man who gave voice to this world was as extraordinary as his creations. Maxim Gorky, born in 1868 and living until 1936, was a self-taught writer who rose from the very depths he depicted, often portrayed as a romantic rebel. His first book, Essays and Stories, published in 1898, brought him immediate fame because it spoke with an authentic, raw voice about the lives of the downtrodden. For Gorky, literature was never a mere aesthetic pursuit, it was a moral and political act. His key work, The Lower Depths, stands as the great exemplar of Russian social realism, masterfully exploring themes of truth versus illusion and human degradation. His pre-revolutionary works are known for an anti-psychologism, a focus on social forces over individual introspection. His life and stance, however, were marked by complexity. He played a major role in 20th-century Russian literature and revolutionary ideology, profoundly influencing Soviet prose in the 1920s and 1930s. Yet, his relationship with the Russian Revolution itself was ambivalent. Despite this, he became inextricably linked to the development of socialist realism and was eulogized upon his death in 1936 as the great Russian writer, friend of the workers, fighter for the victory of socialism. His intellectual development from a chronicler of suffering to a figure associated with a state artistic doctrine reflects the journey of his century. One that sought to find, amidst the uncomfortable truth of human misery, a formula for dignity and change. In 1902, Maxim Gorky thrust Russian theater into a raw, unflinching confrontation with the underside of society through his seminal play The Lower Depths. Set entirely within the suffocating walls of a dilapidated flophouse on the fringes of urban Russia. The play presents a claustrophobic microcosm of human despair and resilience. The air hangs thick with dust and desperation, broken furniture, leaky ceilings, and perpetual twilight define the physical space, mirroring the spiritual decay of its inhabitants. Here, society's forgotten gather thieves, a former actor drowning in alcohol, a streetwalker clinging to fading dignity, a failed inventor, and a murderer hiding in plain sight, all bound not by choice but by their shared expulsion from the world above. Gorky's structure is deliberately static, eschewing traditional dramatic arcs for a mosaic of monologues and fragmented interactions that accumulate into a panoramic portrait of human degradation. This is not a story driven by plot but by presence, the presence of poverty, disease, addiction, and the slow erosion of hope. As a cornerstone of naturalism, the play refuses to romanticize or moralize. Instead, it observes with clinical precision, exposing the mechanisms of social collapse and the ways in which economic and psychological forces warp identity. At the same time, The Lower Depths prefigures socialist realism in its unapologetic critique of systemic injustice, using the flophouse not merely as a setting but as a symbol of a society that discards its weakest members. Each character is a case study in survival, revealing how ideology, delusion, and fleeting ideals compete for space in the human soul when material existence is stripped bare. At the heart of The Lower Depths lies a philosophical duel embodied in two of its most compelling figures: Luka, the wandering pilgrim, and Satin, the defiant intellectual. Though both men seek to offer solace, their methods and underlying beliefs could not be more opposed, transforming their dialogue into a profound ethical debate on truth and illusion. Luka moves through the flophouse like a ghostly healer, dispensing gentle words and compassionate lies. He listens with patient empathy, offering visions of redemption, forgiveness, and heavenly justice to those who have none. To the dying woman Nastia, he promises a better life beyond. To the alcoholic actor, he suggests a second chance in a distant town. His philosophy rests on the idea that truth, in its unvarnished form, is too destructive for broken souls. A lie that consoles is better than a truth that kills, he asserts, a mantra that encapsulates his belief in the moral necessity of illusion. For Luka, kindness sometimes demands deception. Dignity can be preserved not through confrontation with reality, but through its gentle evasion. Satin, in stark contrast, erupts into the play like a thunderclap of defiance. A former propagandist and self-proclaimed man of the people, he delivers one of the play's most electrifying monologues, proclaiming, "Man is a lofty name," a line that becomes the play's ethical anchor. Satin scorns Luka's consolations, seeing them as opiates that numb the will. To him, truth, however brutal, is the only path to authenticity and, ultimately, liberation. You can't live without lying, Satin admits, but insists that the lie must never be mistaken for truth. He charges Luka with enabling passivity, with helping the oppressed accept their chains by promising rewards in an afterlife or a future that will never come. Where Luka offers peace, Satin demands awakening. Their ideological clash is not resolved but sustained, leaving the audience to wrestle with the weight of both positions. Gorky does not anoint a victor, instead, he forces us to confront the cost of each choice. Despite the squalor and degradation that define life in the flophouse, The Lower Depths is not a play about the loss of humanity, it is a testament to its stubborn persistence. Gorky, through sharp dialogue and carefully constructed character arcs, insists that dignity is not contingent on social status, morality, or even sanity. It resides in the capacity to speak, to dream, to resist annihilation even if only in words. Nowhere is this more evident than in Satin's defiant declaration, "Man is a lofty name." This line, delivered with fierce conviction, rises like a banner over the play's landscape of defeat. It is not a description of how people live, but a challenge for how they ought to be seen. Satin elevates the concept of man not as an individual, but as an ideal of potential, of agency, of moral worth. Even in the thief, the drunkard, the prostitute, there remains a spark of this loftiness, however buried. Gorky does not ignore their flaws or crimes, instead, he insists that their suffering does not erase their humanity. Consider the character of the actor, once a man of culture and art, now reduced to begging for vodka. Yet, in his lucid moments, he recites Shakespeare, his voice trembling with lost grandeur. These fragments of memory are not mere nostalgia, they are acts of resistance. Similarly, the streetwalker Nastia clings to the dream of a pure, loving life, even as reality crushes it. These illusions, however fragile, are not signs of weakness but of an unextinguished will to mean something. Gorky's portrayal is deeply empathetic, refusing to reduce his characters to their vices. Each is granted a moment of self-expression, a monologue that reveals inner complexity, longing, and moral reckoning. In this way, the play becomes a radical assertion that dignity is not bestowed by society, but claimed by the individual even. And especially, from the lower depths. The central philosophical tension in the lower depths between Luka's compassionate deceptions and Satin's brutal honesty transcends the play's setting. To pose enduring questions in moral philosophy and psychology. Is truth inherently redemptive, or can it be a weapon of destruction? Can a lie be ethical if it sustains hope? Gorky offers no easy answers, but in staging this conflict, he invites a deeper inquiry into the human condition under duress. From a psychological standpoint, Luka's approach aligns with modern understandings of coping mechanisms. For individuals facing existential despair, particularly those in conditions of extreme marginalization, illusory hope can serve as a vital buffer against complete psychological collapse. Luka's consolations function as palliative care; they do not cure, but they ease suffering. His belief that everyone needs their own truth echoes Carl Rogers' later humanistic psychology, which emphasizes subjective experience and the need for personal meaning. Yet Satin's position resonates with existential and Enlightenment ideals. That self-awareness and intellectual honesty are prerequisites for authentic existence. Drawing from thinkers like Nietzsche and later Sartre, Satin implies that self-deception, however comforting, is a form of bad faith. Only by staring into the abyss, by acknowledging poverty, mortality, and injustice, can one begin to act with genuine autonomy. His famous toast to man is not just a celebration of humanity, but a call to responsibility. To live truthfully is to live freely. Ethically, the debate hinges on consequences versus principles. Luka operates on a utilitarian logic: if a lie prevents despair or suicide, it is justified. Satin adheres to a deontological stance: truth has intrinsic value, regardless of outcome. Gorky, true to the naturalist tradition, withholds judgment. We see the immediate relief Luka brings in, we see the devastation when his illusions are exposed. We hear Satin's electrifying idealism, and we witness his powerlessness to change the world he describes. Ultimately, the lower depths does not resolve this tension but holds it in suspension, forcing audiences to confront their own assumptions. Is survival enough? Or must we demand more truth, dignity, defiance, even at the risk of collapse? In the silence between Luka's whispers and Satin's roar, Gorky finds the enduring struggle of the human spirit. Not to escape the depths, but to remain human within them. In the dim, damp air of a crumbling basement beneath the surface of Tsarist Russia, Maxim Gorky staged a revolution not with guns or manifestos, but with dialogue, character, and unflinching observation. The Lower Depths, first performed in December 1902 at the Moscow Arts Theatre under the meticulous direction of Konstantin Stanislavsky, stands as a pivotal moment in the evolution of Russian literature and a crucial waypoint in the formation of Socialist Realism, the artistic doctrine that would later dominate Soviet cultural life. Though written nearly 2 decades before the Bolshevik Revolution, the play functions as a prototype of socialist realism, an aesthetic philosophy that would later demand art serve the people, depict the struggles of the proletariat, and ultimately affirm the redemptive power of collective struggle and socialist ideals. Gorky, who would go on to be formally recognized as the founder of this method, was not yet bound by state mandates when he penned The Lower Depths. Instead, his approach emerged from raw experience, years spent traversing the Russian Empire, working as a dockworker, sailor, and street laborer, absorbing the rhythms of the dispossessed. This first-hand intimacy with the urban underclass imbued his writing with an authenticity that transcended mere reportage. The play's setting, a squalid flophouse teeming with thieves, failed actors, former officials, and the terminally ill, was revolutionary in its focus. While earlier Russian literature often centered on nobles or intellectuals, Gorky turned his gaze downward, to those society had discarded. In doing so, he broke from traditional hierarchies of narrative importance. His characters are not heroes in the classical sense; they are worn, defeated, clinging to scraps of dignity. Yet within their despair, Gorky planted a seed, the idea that even the lowest could possess inner worth. That their suffering was not divine punishment but the consequence of systemic failure. This is where The Lower Depths straddles 2 worlds, the stark naturalism of Émile Zola and Henrik Ibsen, which sought to document human life with scientific detachment, and the nascent vision of socialist realism, which insisted that art must not only expose injustice but also point toward transformation. The play does not offer an overt revolutionary conclusion, no uprising, no call to arms. But in its very act of bearing witness, in naming the conditions of the oppressed, it performs a radical political function. Central to this duality is the philosophical tension between truth and illusion, embodied in two pivotal characters. Luka, the wandering pilgrim who soothes the desperate with gentle lies, and Satin, the alcoholic orator who champions truth at all costs. Luka tells a consumptive woman she will find peace in a southern sanatorium, a lie that briefly lifts her spirit before she dies unnoticed. Satin, in his famous monologue, declares, "Man is a magnificent thing, a defiant assertion of human dignity even in degradation." This speech, delivered with drunken fervor, would later be embraced by Soviet ideologues as a proto-socialist affirmation of human potential. Thus, the lower depths laid the groundwork for socialist realism not through dogma, but through ethos. By insisting that the marginalized matter, that their lives are worthy of dramatic attention, and that art must grapple with both the brutality of reality and the necessity of hope. It was not doctrinaire, not simplistic, but it was foundational. When the Soviet state later demanded that literature uplift and inspire in service of the collective, it found in Gorky's early work a model that, though complex and often ambiguous, could be molded to fit the new cultural order. To understand the lower depths is to trace a lineage of dramatic innovation stretching from the provincial drawing rooms of Anton Chekhov to the moral labyrinths of Henrik Ibsen, and further back into the clinical gaze of French naturalism. Gorky did not emerge in a vacuum. His play is a synthesis, a confrontation, and at times a rebellion against the dominant theatrical currents of his time. Chekhov's influence looms large, particularly in the structure and mood of the lower depths. Like Chekhov's The Seagull or Three Sisters, Gorky's play unfolds in a series of loosely connected scenes, eschewing traditional plot mechanics in favor of mood, repetition, and the quiet accumulation of despair. There is no single protagonist, no clear arc of redemption, only the cyclical suffering of a community trapped at the bottom of society. The characters speak in fragments, their conversations meandering, often interrupted, echoing Chekhov's belief that life rarely delivers clean resolutions. Yet Gorky diverges sharply in tone and subject. While Chekhov's characters mourn lost estates and unfulfilled dreams, Gorky's inhabit literal ruins. The psychological subtlety of the Russian intelligentsia gives way to the raw, often brutal expressions of the destitute. Gorky strips away the veneer of culture and education, exposing the body in pain, the mind in collapse. In this, he aligns more closely with the naturalist tradition exemplified by Émile Zola, who argued that literature should function like a scientific experiment, observing human behavior under the pressure of environment and heredity. In the lower depths, environment is everything. The basement itself is a character, a suffocating, airless space that reflects and reinforces the moral and physical decay of its inhabitants. Gorky's method, which he described as scenes from Russian life, echoes Zola's Therese Raquin or Germinal, where characters are shaped by forces beyond their control, poverty, addiction, illness. But where Zola often portrayed his subjects with clinical detachment, Gorky infuses his with empathy. His naturalism is not cold, it is charged with moral urgency. Ibsen, too, casts a long shadow, particularly in the play's philosophical depth. Like an enemy of the people or the wild duck, the lower depths centers on a fundamental ethical question. Is it better to live in comforting illusion or to endure painful truth? Luka, the compassionate deceiver, recalls Hjalmar Ekdal's father in The Wild Duck, who sustains his family with elaborate fantasies. Satin, with his fiery rhetoric about human dignity, evokes Dr. Stockman, the truth-teller ostracized by society. But where Ibsen's protagonists often stand apart as moral beacons, Gorky's truth speaker is an alcoholic, and his idealist is a drifter with no fixed principles. The moral authority is decentralized, unstable, reflecting a world where no one holds a monopoly on wisdom. Gorky's genius lay in his ability to absorb these influences and transmute them into something new. He took Chekhov's atmospheric realism, Ibsen's ethical rigor, and Zola's social determinism, then set them in motion among the forgotten. The result was not mere imitation, but a radical reorientation of dramatic purpose, theater as a mirror held up not to the soul of the individual, but to the sickness of the social body. When The Lower Depths premiered at the Moscow Arts Theatre in December 1902, it detonated like a bomb beneath the foundations of Russian culture. Directed by Konstantin Stanislavsky with painstaking realism down to the authentic stench of the set, reportedly achieved with actual refuse, the production stunned audiences with its unrelenting portrayal of human degradation. Critics were divided, but none could ignore it. Some recoiled at its bleakness, calling it a cesspool of despair. Others hailed it as a masterpiece of social truth, a cry from the abyss that demanded to be heard. In the years following its debut, the play's reputation grew internationally, influencing a generation of playwrights committed to social realism. From Bertolt Brecht to Clifford Odets, Brecht, in particular, studied the work closely, admiring its ensemble structure and its refusal to sentimentalize poverty. Yet even as it gained acclaim abroad, the lower depths became a battleground of interpretation within Russia, especially after the 1917 revolution. Under the Soviet regime, Gorky was elevated to the status of literary patriarch. And the lower depths was reinterpreted through the lens of socialist realism. The play's depiction of suffering was now seen not as an indictment of society, but as a necessary prelude to awakening. Satin's declaration that man is a magnificent thing was extracted, celebrated, and often quoted in isolation, a rallying cry for human potential under socialism. Luka's comforting lies, by contrast, were condemned as bourgeois idealism, a dangerous opiate that pacified the masses. This ideological reading, however, flattened the play's complexity. Gorky himself resisted such simplification. Though he supported the revolution and returned to the USSR in the 1930s as a cultural icon, he reportedly objected to state-mandated interpretations of his work. The lower depths was never intended as propaganda, its power lies in its ambiguity. Is Luka a saint or a charlatan? Is Satin a prophet or a drunkard shouting into the void? The play refuses to answer. In the post-Soviet era, critical reassessments have restored much of this nuance. Scholars now emphasize the spiritual and existential dimensions of the work, the way it grapples with faith, identity, and the search for meaning in a godless world. Some interpret Luka as a Christ-like figure offering compassion in the absence of salvation, others see him as a symbol of passive resignation. Satin, meanwhile, is read not just as a champion of truth, but as a tragic figure whose ideals are rendered impotent by his own self-destruction. Today, the lower depths is recognized not as a doctrinal text, but as a living, contested work, one that resists final interpretation. Its endurance lies in its ability to provoke debate, to unsettle, to force audiences to confront the uncomfortable question: what do we owe to those at the bottom? Since its premiere, The Lower Depths has traveled far beyond the confines of a Moscow basement, reimagined across continents, media, and political contexts. Its universal themes, poverty, dignity, the struggle between truth and illusion, have made it a magnet for adaptation. Each version revealing as much about its time and place as about Gorky's original text. One of the most celebrated adaptations is Akira Kurosawa's 1957 Japanese film of the same name. Transposed to a Meiji-era slum, Kurosawa's version retains the claustrophobic setting and ensemble structure but deepens the spiritual inquiry. Influenced by No theater in Buddhist thought, the film emphasizes impermanence and suffering, with Luka's character embodying a Zen-like compassion. Kurosawa tilts the balance toward Luka, suggesting that in a world of unrelenting pain, kindness may be the highest truth. Jean Renoir, too, adapted the play in 1936, setting it in a Parisian flophouse. His version, while faithful to the plot, softens some of the harsher edges, emphasizing camaraderie among the down and out. Renoir's humanism transforms the basement into a space of fleeting solidarity, reflecting his belief in the resilience of the human spirit. On stage, the play has been reinterpreted in countless productions, from gritty naturalist renditions to avant-garde deconstructions. In post-war Germany, it was staged as a critique of fascism's dehumanizing effects. In 21st century New York, it has been reset in homeless shelters, drawing parallels between czarist neglect and modern housing crises. Each adaptation hinges on how it resolves or refuses to resolve the central conflict between Luka and Satin. Does the director side with the lie that comforts, or the truth that destroys? In Soviet productions, Satin's final speech was often delivered with heroic gravitas, a beacon of socialist hope. In Western stagings, it is more likely to be undercut with irony, a drunken outburst that changes nothing. This enduring interpretive flexibility is a testament to the play's depth. More than a social document, The Lower Depths is a philosophical engine, perpetually generating questions about how we live, how we lie, and how we find meaning in the dark. Over a century after its debut, it remains not just a landmark of modern drama, but a mirror held up to the soul of society, one that continues to reflect our deepest fears and our most fragile hopes. To fully grasp the suffocating atmosphere of The Lower Depths, one must step beyond the footlights and into the social sciences. Maxim Gorky's 1902 play does not merely depict poverty, it anatomizes it, laying bare the psychological mechanisms that sustain human beings on the brink of oblivion. Drawing from early 20th century sociology and contemporary psychological research, we see in Gorky's characters a chilling reflection of what modern studies term learned helplessness, a condition where prolonged exposure to inescapable hardship erodes the belief in personal agency. The inhabitants of the flophouse are not simply destitute, they are dispossessed of hope as thoroughly as they are of shelter or food. Sociological analyses of marginalized communities, particularly in urban underclasses, reveal patterns eerily mirrored in Gorky's ensemble. The reliance on collective myths, the oscillation between escapism and despair, and the paradoxical comfort derived from self-deception. The character Luka, with his soothing parables of redemption and better worlds beyond. Gorky's moral universe is forged in the crucible of late 19th century philosophical upheaval. Though often associated with socialist realism, his early work, particularly The Lower Depths, bears the indelible marks of Dostoevskian existential inquiry and Nietzschean confrontation with nihilism, filtered through a materialist lens shaped by Chernyshevsky's utilitarian radicalism. At the heart of the play lies a Dostoevskian question: can a person retain their soul in the absence of hope? Like the underground man or Raskolnikov, Gorky's characters wrestle with freedom, guilt, and the burden of self-awareness. Yet unlike Dostoevsky, who ultimately turns toward spiritual redemption, Gorky offers no transcendent resolution. Instead, he probes the limits of human endurance in a world stripped of divine sanction. This secular agon is where Nietzsche's shadow looms largest. The play embodies Nietzsche's warning: when God is dead, humanity must either create new values or descend into reactive ressentiment. In the flophouse, both impulses collide. Some, like the actor, cling to fading ideals of honor and artistry; others, like Bubnov, internalize hatred and project it downward. The suicide of the actor, triggered by the collapse of his last illusion, mirrors Nietzsche's fear that without higher aspirations, life becomes unlivable. Yet Gorky also stands within the Enlightenment tradition, particularly in his insistence on truth-telling as a moral imperative. While Luka offers comforting lies, there's compassion in the world. The younger character Satin mounts a fiery defense of truth, declaring, "Man is a proud word." This declaration is not merely rhetorical, it is philosophical. It echoes Voltairean rationalism and Chernyshevskian belief in progress through knowledge, even as it diverges from both in its tragic context. For Gorky, truth is not a path to immediate salvation but a prerequisite for any future liberation. The tension between comfort and truth, between Luka's mercy and Satin's rigor, structures the play's deepest philosophical conflict. One that would preoccupy the Russian intelligentsia for decades. The reception of The Lower Depths under Soviet rule exemplifies the complex, often contradictory mechanics of socialist realism. The state-mandated aesthetic doctrine formalized in 1934, which demanded art serve the revolutionary cause while maintaining artistic diversity within strict ideological boundaries. Gorky, elevated posthumously to the status of founder of socialist realism, became a symbolic figurehead. Yet his most famous play resisted easy assimilation into the Soviet cultural canon. Officially, The Lower Depths was celebrated as a searing indictment of Tsarist Russia's social iniquities, a precursor to revolutionary consciousness. School textbooks and state-sponsored productions emphasized its exposure of capitalist exploitation, aligning it with the narrative of inevitable proletarian awakening. However, the play's profound ambiguity, its lack of clear revolutionary agency, its portrayal of fatalism, and its unresolved ending posed a challenge to Jadonafera cultural orthodoxy, which demanded optimistic, forward-looking narratives of collective struggle and triumph. The character of Satin, though lauded for his defense of human dignity, was selectively interpreted. His impassioned speech on the dignity of man was quoted in isolation, stripped of its tragic context and the character's own moral flaws. Meanwhile, Luka's passivity, a figure who pacifies the poor with otherworldly promises, was downplayed or reinterpreted as a critique of religious consolation, rather than a deeper exploration of the psychology of the oppressed. The Soviet cultural apparatus thus performed a kind of ideological alchemy, transforming a play steeped in existential doubt into a didactic tool of state pedagogy. This co-optation was not seamless. Dissident intellectuals, including later figures like Solzhenitsyn, recognized in Gorky's original text a subversive undercurrent, a portrayal of spiritual degradation under any system that denies human agency. The nomenclatura's embrace of Gorky was therefore both genuine and instrumental, revealing the central paradox of Stalinist mass culture. The simultaneous reverence for literary giants and the relentless editing of their legacy to fit the contours of National Bolshevism. Despite its canonical status, The Lower Depths has drawn sustained critique, particularly from feminist and post-colonial scholars who interrogate its silences and representational hierarchies. The play's all-male ensemble, except for the marginalized figures of Nastia and Vasilisa, reflects not only the social reality of transient male laborers but also the gendered limitations of Gorky's vision. Women appear primarily as objects of exchange, symbols of moral decay, or instruments of domestic conflict. Vasilisa, the pragmatic and domineering landlady, embodies a particularly fraught archetype, the strong woman punished for transgressing gender norms, ultimately destroyed by the very system she navigates. Nastia, the young woman fleeing rural oppression only to fall into sexual exploitation, is portrayed with pathos but little interiority, reduced to a cipher of victimhood. From a feminist perspective, the play's moral universe remains stubbornly patriarchal. The central debates about truth, dignity, and agency occur exclusively among men. Women's suffering is visible, but their voices are excluded from the philosophical discourse that defines the work. This absence cannot be dismissed as mere historical realism. It reflects the broader marginalization of female subjectivity in the Russian intelligentsia's revolutionary imagination, a theme later challenged by writers like Vera Feiner and Alexandra Kollontai. Post-colonial readings further complicate the play's legacy. Though set in an ethnically homogeneous space, the lower depths can be seen as an allegory of internal colonization, the way Imperial Russia's peripheries and underclasses were rendered invisible, their lives deemed unworthy of narrative complexity. The flophouse becomes a microcosm of the affirmative action empire in reverse, a space not of inclusion, but of erasure. The characters' loss of names, histories, and regional identities mirrors the Soviet project of homogenization, where difference was either suppressed or exoticized. Moreover, the play's unresolved tension between truth and comfort continues to provoke debate. Is Satin's insistence on truth a liberatory stance, or a privileged ideal that ignores the psychological necessity of illusion for the traumatized? Camus and Sartre would later grapple with similar dilemmas, but Gorky offers no resolution, only the haunting persistence of the question. This ambiguity, once a source of its power, now invites criticism for ideological indeterminacy. Yet it is precisely this refusal to provide easy answers that secures the lower depths as an enduring provocation, a work that resists final interpretation, much like the human condition it so unflinchingly portrays. More than a century after its premiere, The Lower Depths continues to echo through the corridors of contemporary social consciousness. Maxim Gorky's unflinching portrayal of life at society's margins, the beggars, the outcasts, the broken former professionals trapped in a squalid flophouse, feels not like a relic of Imperial Russia but a mirror reflecting the persistent fissures of modern inequality. In an age marked by widening wealth gaps, housing crises, and the invisibility of the unhoused, Gorky's naturalistic tableau resonates with renewed urgency. Today's conversations around mental health, addiction, and systemic neglect find a precursor in the polyphonic despair of The Lower Depths. Each character, from the alcoholic actor to the aging thief, embodies a unique trajectory of downfall. Yet collectively they form a chorus of human vulnerability rarely granted space in mainstream narratives. Gorky refuses sentimentality. There is no romanticizing of poverty, no redemptive arc imposed from above. Instead, he presents a radical act of witness, to see the marginalized not as problems to be solved, but as subjects with interiority, dignity, and the right to speak their truth. This ethical stance carries profound implications for how we tell stories about the dispossessed. In an era of poverty porn and performative empathy in media, Gorky's work serves as a corrective. His use of social realism demands authenticity, not exploitation. The play challenges artists and audiences alike. Can truth be spoken without descending into voyeurism? Can comfort be rejected in favor of honesty, even when that honesty is unbearable? These questions are central to modern debates about representation, particularly in documentary, journalism, and socially engaged art. Gorky's humanism, rooted not in optimism, but in respect, offers a compass. At the heart of The Lower Depths lies a philosophical fulcrum: truth versus illusion. The flophouse dwellers survive through lie, self-deception, comforting myths, and invented pasts. But into this fragile ecosystem walks Satin, a character who defiantly champions truth as the foundation of human dignity. Man sounds magnificent, he declares, a line that reverberates beyond the stage as a manifesto for the intrinsic worth of every individual, regardless of circumstance. This assertion is not naive idealism. It emerges from the ash of despair, forged in the crucible of suffering. Gorky does not offer easy answers. He presents a world where moral lines blur, where theft and betrayal coexist with tenderness and fleeting solidarity. Yet, through Satin's voice and the play's unrelenting psychological realism, Gorky posits that dignity is not bestowed by social status, but claimed through the courage to confront reality. The play's alignment with socialist realism, a mode later institutionalized in the Soviet Union, is complex. While Gorky would become a figurehead of that tradition, the lower depths resists ideological simplification. It does not preach revolution, it interrogates the soul. Its value lies not in offering a political program, but in modeling a form of artistic responsibility. To depict the world as it is, without flinching, while still affirming the irreducible value of the human spirit. Drawing from literary, philosophical, and social science insights, we can understand Gorky's enduring message as a triad. Truth as resistance, dignity as defiance, and art as testimony. In a world where misinformation and distraction are tools of power, the act of truthful representation becomes revolutionary. Gorky's work reminds us that to name suffering is not to surrender to it, but to begin the work of recognition, and from recognition, the possibility of change. The legacy of the lower depths invites deeper scholarly engagement across disciplines. One promising avenue is digital textual analysis of Gorky's broader corpus: novels, essays, and memoirs using computational methods to trace the evolution of his humanist philosophy and linguistic patterns across time. Such analysis could reveal how his portrayal of marginality shifted in response to political and personal upheavals. Equally compelling are comparative studies between the lower depths and global narratives of slum life and social exclusion, from the favelas of Rio to the Dharavi settlements of Mumbai. From 20th century American proletarian fiction to contemporary African urban literature. These cross-cultural dialogues could illuminate universal and context-specific dimensions of human resilience and systemic neglect. Moreover, emerging fields in neurocognitive literary studies offer tools to investigate how audiences physiologically and emotionally respond to truth-telling. In narrative, what happens in the brain when we encounter unvarnished depictions of suffering? How do stories like Gorky's affect empathy, moral reasoning, or political engagement? Experimental studies using fMRI or psychometric surveys could bridge aesthetics and neuroscience, grounding artistic impact in measurable human response. Finally, archival research into early 20th century performances of the play, particularly at the Moscow Art Theatre under Stanislavsky's direction, could yield insights into how theatrical realism shaped audience perception and contributed to the play's landmark status in modern drama. The Lower Depths is not a play that offers solace. It offers something far more valuable: truth. In the damp, crumbling walls of a forgotten flophouse, Maxim Gorky erected a monument to the human spirit, not in triumph, but in endurance. His characters do not rise from the ashes, many are crushed by them. Yet, in their voices, their lies, their fleeting hopes, and their moments of startling honesty, they assert a fundamental dignity. This is the play's enduring power. It insists that to be human is not to be comfortable, but to be conscious. Dignity, Gorky teaches us, is not the absence of suffering, but the refusal to be dehumanized by it. It is found in the act of speaking, of listening, of naming what is real even when reality is unbearable. As a seminal work of Russian naturalism and a precursor to existential and socially conscious theater, The Lower Depths reshaped the landscape of 20th century drama. But its significance transcends literary history. It remains a vital, living interrogation of what it means to be human in a world of injustice. In its stark light, we are all called to see and to decide whether we, too, can bear the truth.